12 months ago today, the Taliban took control of the capital of Afghanistan, Kabul. The Western-backed government had collapsed and the world watched in disbelief. It came after a lightning advance across the country by the militant group as it seized province after province from Afghanistan's military. Their victory, the chaotic evacuation of Afghans and foreigners, the images of desperate young men trying to cling to a US military plane taking off from Kabul airport was a moment of reckoning for the West, which had funded and armed the Afghan government. In the next hour, we'll look at what was promised by the Taliban leaders 12 months ago and the state of Afghanistan now. First, let's look back at these pictures from a year ago, which shocked the world. Many Western-backed Afghan government leaders had already fled, while thousands of Afghan citizens and foreigners, fearing Taliban rule, scrambled to find room on flights out. In the next few months, many aspects of life slid towards collapse, with food shortages, power cuts, and with the approaching winter, a humanitarian crisis. I returned to Afghanistan in late 2021 and saw for myself the impact, especially on the youngest of victims, children. When I visited a pediatric ward at a hospital in Kabul, there I saw badly malnourished children with their mothers who had little hope for the future. Here's what I saw.
از کم خوراکی هم است.
نفی از این مریضا که هسته این خانه چیز نداره که یعنی طفلکش سم منظم خوراک و چیز تهیه میکنه بعضی خاطر به میخوره
اینا من غریبن کلشان غریبن میبینی اما بی غریبن پشت نان پدرشان غریبه به بیرون میگردن اینا اما که بنده خدا سیکو مثل فانک ور گیس کردن کلشان آماس کردن یک ما در روز میشه یه باره به تو کندیده بودم کندیده بعد یواش یکم آرام شد خوب شد ولی حالی فعلا یکم چشمش واش شد
نامت چیه؟
لدی نام چیست جانی؟
منی رحمت
منی رحمت
سنش چند؟ سلوت کالا؟
چند
Everywhere you look in this ward, there's a mother praying, and it feels like that's all they have now. Every baby and child in here is in a critical state, and we just don't know if they're going to make it. Well, one thing I witnessed going back to Afghanistan at the end of 2021 was the growing threat of the Islamic State in Afghanistan. The rise of a regional affiliate known as ISKP was having a major impact on many people's lives. They were exploiting the poverty and hunger to try and recruit people to challenge the Taliban's authority. We've been called here by the Taliban police who wanted to show us an ISIS sleeper cell that they recently attacked. So what happened here?
د چې کله چاپه والې وه چاپه خو په دا دروازه کې وه صحیح دي یو سړی چې کوم د دوی سره جنګ وکړ هغه یې په دغه ځای باندې ویشتلی و دلې یې پروت و دلته دویم سړي خپل ځان ته انفجار ورکړی و ګوره شاوخوا کشنې کشنې ټوټې دا چې دلته په دا دیوالو مښتې دي.
Do you have reports of who they were and what their background is?
The investigation is on.
شما وقت یعنی جنگتان خلاص شد فکر کردین که رقم یک چیز باز شروع میشه که داعش پیدا میشه و دی خانه‌های رقم کارا میکنن؟
یک حادثه بود تصادفاً ما اینطور پیش بینی میکنیم ولی در همه دنیا همینطور تصادف هست از ما بهتر میدانیم که در همه دنیا همون جایی که شما خیلی امن ترین دنیا را میگین یعنی امریکا، نیویورک، بریتانیا در همون جای چیزایی میایه.
Well, one of the most striking changes in Afghanistan since the Taliban returned to power has been the reversal of the basic rights of women and girls. Girls have been banned from secondary schools. Many women are no longer working and advised to stay in their homes. Afghan women who once held positions of authority across Afghan society have all but disappeared. In the last few days, we have seen women taking to the streets of Kabul to protest. A demonstration that lasted no more than 10 minutes before the Taliban started firing shots to disperse them. Last month, I was in Afghanistan again and heard from a group of women about how they felt. Have a listen.
یعنی بیشتر درک می‌کردم که جایی برای زن‌ها وجود نداره در ایران. باشیم نام سکولار، غرب زده، زن بیدین، کافر و صدها موضوع فساد اخلاقی را به ما وصل می‌کنند. در این جامعه سنتی یعنی مقابله کردن یک شجاعت بسیار بزرگ می‌خواد. همین که فعلا در این شرایط ما آمدیم، همین خودش یک مقابله است. شب بتونم تنها از خانه بیرون بشم. درسته با مخالفت خانواده آنها مقصر نیستن. این شرایط دیده اونا میبینن میترسن. من لازم کن داره بارها استادم کردم. تو بدون محرم کجا میری؟ من یک پدر دارم. او پدر من میتونه که محرم 4 خواهر ما و مادر ما و به اصطلاح خواهرزادای ما باشه. و من خیلی مشکل است که من برام حالی در خانه بشینم و منتظر باشم که مرا پدرم چی وقت میبره.
Well, while many in Afghanistan say they've lost their freedoms, for the Taliban and their supporters, today is a day of celebration. The Taliban have declared a national holiday to mark 1 year since they seized power. The movement's black and white flags are flying in the main square in the capital, and pickup trucks full of fighters are patrolling the streets. In some areas, the Taliban takeover has been welcomed as marking the end of years of fighting between the Taliban and the former Afghan security forces backed by international troops. Well, over the past year, myself and my colleagues in Afghanistan and correspondent Secunda Kamani and our chief international correspondent Lise Doucette have been following the story. They join me now from Kabul and Kandahar. Thank you both for joining me and for your reporting over not just the last year, but for many years. And Lise, I'm going to come to you first because, of course, you've covered every twist and turn in Afghanistan for more than 3 decades. I just want your assessment of being back in Kabul now a year after the Taliban takeover.
Well, Yalda, who wouldn't welcome among Afghans the end of the attacks by the Taliban, the end of the US-led military campaign, which terrorized many villagers here across this country? But who wouldn't welcome a time of peace? But it's very difficult to call this a time of peace because it's a very uneasy time for so many Afghans. And I have to say, as you mentioned, there have been so many twists and turns in this more than 40-year-long war, but I don't think I've ever seen such a dark tunnel at the end of this particular turn. Afghans had dared to hope that they could believe the Taliban promises as the Taliban advanced towards the capital. The Taliban, as you remember, who said in the Qatari capital Doha that Afghan women would be able to hold any job except perhaps for president. They'd be able to choose their life partner, that girls would have their rights within Islam just like the boys. And what we've seen across this country, and we were able to travel to the Central Highlands, to remote areas. We traveled to the western city of Herat. We've been meeting people here in Kabul, and no matter if they're highly educated, no matter if they're illiterate farmers, they all told us the same thing. They want their girls to be educated just like their boys. We had a fascinating discussion in the Central Highlands where tribal elders in a village as remote as you could get, as poor as you could get in Afghanistan, told us that, well, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Iran, they're progressing, they're Islamic states. We're telling our leaders of the Islamic Emirate that we want to progress too. We want to see changes in our society.
Yeah, and Lise, in the next few minutes, we will be showing that piece to our audience. But let's go to Secunda, who joins us from Kandahar. And Secunda, we were just talking there a little earlier about those flags in Kabul and celebrations, but we're seeing similar celebrations in Kandahar.
Yeah, that's right. We were out in the centre of Kandahar a little earlier today, and there were Taliban fighters, their supporters, driving up and down, parading up and down a main road in the centre of the city, waving the white and black flags, children on board too. The Taliban, as you've said, see this as a celebration of their victory, their struggle against the US-led international presence here in Afghanistan, as well as the Afghan government. They see this as a kind of Independence Day, really, but many other Afghans even those here in the south of the country, which is generally seen as being much more conservative, where there are large elements of society who are more supportive of the Taliban, there are many people here who are deeply despondent about the future, worried about the trajectory that the country is going in. But as Lise was saying, there are nuances to the situation here. I was in rural Helmand province a few days ago, and I was speaking to people in Sangin district who were terribly affected by the war. They were unable to, even carry out the most basic parts of daily life, going into their fields, for example. And now they felt a sense of relief because the war was over. There was peace for them. Everyone here, whether they're in the cities, whether they're in the villages, even back in Kabul and the north of the country, of course, they're also terribly affected by the economic crisis here. That's one thing that unites Afghans, but there are people, particularly here in the south of the country, particularly in those more rural areas, who are supportive of the Taliban and are glad they've taken control of the country. There are also critics. I spoke to one man who faces arrest, faces the risk of arrest.
We've just lost Sukhunder. Of course, he's in Kandahar, so the connection isn't great. But that was Sukhunder Kamani, and of course, we will be speaking to Lise again a little later in the programme. Thank you so much, Lise, for joining us as well.